is the Associate Director of Program. She's projects and projects operations for ParentLink, and she has been with us since October. Her background includes both formal and informal education. Donna has spent much of her career working as a middle school teacher, elementary and middle school principal, and as an educational consultant working with school principals on various school issues, such as enhancing school environments or family and academic issues. She also worked in 4-H youth development as a St. Louis County specialist and state specialist with Brad, where she developed curriculum, wrote grants, led cultural competence professional development opportunities, and worked with underrepresented and non-traditional 4-H audiences. So Donna, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thanks for presenting this morning.
Thank you, Yvette, and good morning, everyone. The topic today is on mental health. So July, we know a lot of things happen in July, but July is also a month that is considered to be National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And so that's our focus today. One of the things I think we really want to think about when we talk about National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month is to think about the population in the United States and where it's going. And so the United States population is becoming more and more diverse. And it's predicted that by the year 2044, more than half of all Americans will belong to a minority group. And when we say minority group, we're talking about any group other than non-Hispanic Caucasian alone. So I call this "It's Okay Not to Be Okay," because, think about when people ask you, how are you doing? Normally we just automatically, oh, I'm doing okay, even if we're not. But what we have to start to realize is that it's okay if you're not okay. And it's okay to let people know if you're not okay. So, what we have to understand, and especially those who are members of minority populations. And when we talk about minority populations, I also want you to remember that this expands beyond just race and ethnicity. Minority populations include people of various race and ethnicities, gender and sexual orientations, religious groups, as well as people with disabilities. And as I was doing some research, what I found was that the American Psychiatric Association tells us that ethnic racial minorities often bear a disproportionately high burden of disability that result from mental disorders, and that mental and behavior disorders are among the leading causes of disabilities in the United States, and that accounts for approximately 13.6% of all years of life that are lost to disability and premature death. So what is National Minority Mental Health Month? So National Minority Mental Health Month, it's a nationwide effort, and it was developed by Mental Health America to recognize mental health issues in disadvantaged communities. And you may figure, well, why is this important? Why is it important to acknowledge and emphasize mental health for minority populations? So there are certain things that we always want to keep in mind. Minority populations' vulnerability to depression and suicide may be caused by several factors, and some of those factors, and I'm just naming some of them, there are more than what I will name this morning. One is poverty. One of the major risk factors for increased stress and mental health issues is poverty. And people of color are more likely to hover near the poverty line, bouncing from under to over throughout their lives. And when you talk about poverty, you're also talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. And studies have shown that when individuals and communities are lifted out of poverty, mental health improves. We have to mention discrimination, racial discrimination intentionally. And those who face racism are more likely to develop mental health issues. You know, discrimination and racism creates stress responses and traumatic experiences. And these can lead to reduced capacity to cope, to adjust, and to seek care when it's needed. I was reading a study that found that people between the ages of 18 to 28 who frequently faced racist speech or behavior were 25% more likely to develop mental illness or distress. And again, part of this is due to trauma, as having to endure racism. It can be a very traumatic experience for most. And this, again, can cause symptoms such as stress or anxiety or depression. And in some cases, those symptoms will mirror that of PTSD. The American Psychological Association also estimated that racial discrimination is a predominant source of stress in 67% of African American adults. And then further studies show that across African American, Hispanic, and Asian groups, 63% face racial discrimination overall. And so when you bundle this frequency with the type of symptoms that can be caused, it becomes clear why mental health issues are more prevalent in these communities. Another way that racism kind of sneaks into the way we speak is through what we call microaggressions. And I don't know if you are familiar with that term or not. It's a term, it's not a new term, but it is a term that, you know, was coined back in the 70s and has become more prevalent. And basically what these are is their slights, their snubs, or their insults, you know, that are specifically directed at a person. They can be intentional, they can be unintentional, based upon the group that they belong to. So an example of a microaggression would be someone saying to a person that may be Asian, that speaks English very well, despite this being their first language. They may ask them, you know, well, what language do you speak? You know, because they are Asian. Or saying to them, you speak English very well, you know, even though that is their first language. So there are some key racial microaggressions that we find that can present themselves. One is called invisibility. And so it's, you know, treating someone as though they're lower in status, their viewpoints are not considered. Basically, you know, they feel invisible. That's how they're made to feel. There's criminality, where we're treating someone as aggressive or dangerous because of the group that they belong to. Low achieving, you know, making an assumption, which we never should do, that one's racial background determines how well they will do. There's sexualization, which is being treated in an overly sexual manner. There's a term we use called foreigner, which is being made to feel as though one doesn't belong. And then there is environmental invalidations. And this is when we have negative ideas about one's race from observation that members of a racial group don't hold prominence in specific areas like work, school, or government. And so while there may be feelings that this term simply means people are being too sensitive, and we hear that a lot, that, oh, well, they're just being too sensitive, um, on whatever the subject is. What we have to realize is that microaggressions can have the same negative mental health effects as more blatant forms of racism. And this is because they, present people who face them with the same type of frequent trauma that other forms of language provide. And so sometimes it's, if you have not been subjected to it, sometimes it can be hard to really understand. But you will often hear people of color, especially males, talk about how they are walking down the street and there may be other people walking down the street who are not of the same minority persuasion, that all of a sudden, they'll clutch their purses very tightly or walk across to the other side of the street. I was in a situation once where I had gone to a conference, and it was a youth development conference, and everybody in the room, they were, educators who should have been very culturally competent. And the lady that was presenting, you could tell that the cultural competency was not quite there. She was presenting on a program that she was implementing on a reservation. And when she described the population, her description was very negative, and all of the stereotypes that we hear about Native Americans is how she described the group of young people that she was working with. And this was allowed to go on. The people who were over this conference that were in the room never stopped her, never questioned anything. And so most of us are kind of sitting there thinking, what in the world is going on here? And then something else happened, and there were just some other culturally competent things that should have not taken place. And finally, a man stood up and who was just irate. And he told us what his name was and explained to us that he's Native American. He was Native American. He lived in Minnesota. And he talked about the microaggressions and how he deals with them every day. And his comment, and I'll never forget it, was, I'm a man that is brown. And when people see me, this is what they see first. They see a brown man. And then he went on to talk about all of the microaggressions that he deals with on a regular basis and how this affects him. And of course, sitting in that room where this is something that you should not have to deal with, really upset him, and it should have. But microaggressions really do take their tolls on people, just like they did with this gentleman. And I was very glad that he was able to voice that. And then there's lack of access to mental health care. When you deal with minority populations, oftentimes there is lack of access to mental health care. There's lack of insurance. People might be underinsured. And if you add to those challenges the long-term pandemic and the related economic insecurities that we're dealing with, that's a huge strain. There's always been a substantial gap in the quality of mental health care that people receive. Part of the reason is that only 16% of mental health care workers are people of color. And ultimately, in order to close this gap, there needs to be more diversity and better understanding within the mental health care system. There's also a lack of sufficient mental health professionals working in the public health system. So for mental health providers or others who want to better serve diverse populations, culturally sensitive care means that there has to be an understanding of systemic racism, from microaggressions to direct discrimination and harassment. Culturally competent care might be an even bigger burden for those that are seeking care. Stigma, which is huge in a lot of minority communities when it comes to mental health, can make people reluctant to discuss their mental health needs with friends or with family or their healthcare providers. And providers need to be trained to understand the populations that they serve and to understand the differences and the different needs between and within groups. One of the issues that we sometimes see is that mental health care providers or just providers in general will see a group of people and think, oh, well, this group, whatever, whatever, whatever. But even within specific groups, there are other subcategories in those groups. And so it doesn't mean that you can treat everybody the same or that everybody has the same needs, because that's just not the case. You know, lack of cultural understanding by healthcare providers can contribute to underdiagnoses and or misdiagnosis of mental health in people from racially, ethnically diverse populations. And factors that contribute to these kind of misdiagnoses can include language differences between the patient and the provider. Again, that's stigma of mental health illness among minority groups, and cultural presentation of symptoms. And so there's a lot to be considered. People from racial, ethnic minority groups, they're less likely to receive mental health care. So, you know, minority communities face an uphill battle when it comes to combating mental health issues. And then on top of the lack of access to mental health care and all of these other issues, we have to think about the repeated exposure through the news and social media to police violence. You know, we know that we hear about police brutality, especially, you know, over the past few years. We're hearing about it more and more. And it's not that it didn't exist previously, it's just that, you know, now people have a way to record and get it out there through social media. And so people are just more privy to what has been going on for years. And so the repeated exposure through the news and social media to police violence against unarmed African-American people specifically also undermines one's well-being. Police violence is an ongoing problem in the United States, and it describes the police's use of excessive and unwarranted force that often results in death or serious bodily injury. Black people are more likely to be killed by the police than any other demographic, and they are killed at higher rates. So it's important to be aware that, you know, police violence is not about the crime, but rather the racial profiling and systemic racism that's plagued this country since its birth. Police violence also has negative psychological effects on the communities that experience it, and in particular, the African-American community. You know, most of us are, you know, educated and know about the Mike Brown case that happened in Ferguson, you know, about 5, 6, 7 years ago. Most of us, you know, are familiar with the George Floyd case, and we've seen how communities have changed. I live in St. Louis County, and so when the Mike Brown incident happened, I was very, you know, much in tune to what was going on. I can remember the day that it happened. And the reason why is because I received a text message that day, the day that Mike Brown was killed. And this was before it even like hit the news. And somebody sent me this message with a picture of him lying on the ground and said, look at this. You know, this man was killed and just lying in the middle of the street. And I just will never forget that, you know. that visual of this, young man lying in the street. And this is not to say that, all police are bad, because they're not. It's just to say that, the police brutality that is experienced by specific communities needs to stop. The families of individuals that police violence affects, as well as the victims of police brutality, are often forgotten in conversations regarding police accountability, and no government-funded programs existed to provide mental health support to the victims of police brutality and the family members of those affected by police violence. We are providing support in other areas, but sometimes we seem to forget, how it affects us mentally, because it does affect us. The unfortunate truth is that when an officer is involved in a shooting or any sort of brutality, again, there's no publicly funded services available to the family members of the victim. And so as a result of the persistence of police brutality and the wide media coverage, many African Americans live in fear of future encounters with police officers. The exposure to police killings can trigger acute stress that is amplified when people view the killings as unjustified. And this is known as the spillover effect, where members of the community suffer harm, although they may not be directly affected, because they've witnessed or heard about the killings. Overall, police killings of unarmed Black Americans affect 33% of Black Americans and could contribute 55 million excess poor mental health days per year for Black adults. And so to put this in perspective, 20.6% of African Americans suffer from diabetes. And meaning diabetes is responsible for 75 million additional poor mental health days. And this suggests the killing of unarmed African Americans is another factor in a list of many that unjustifiably is detrimental to the health of an African American individual. Among minority adults, depression and suicidal thoughts might also show up as extreme fatigue, hopelessness, even resignation. And for those who've struggled with suicidal ideation, it's not uncommon to hear them say, I'm so tired, or, if I don't wake up in the morning, I'll be okay with that. And so the stigma society applies to the concept of mental illness, and some people's resulting reluctance to seek professional help may also heighten the risk of suicide. Minority people who are stressed and have depression continue to hold jobs. They go to school, serve in church, show up for their kids' sports games and everything else. They do what everybody else does, despite suffering. And they do it because they have to provide for others. Those are some of the issues in the minority community when it comes to mental health, and why this is such an issue that needs to be addressed, and why it is so prevalent. So let's talk about ways that can enhance minority mental health. And actually, these can enhance anybody's mental health. And this is called You Are Not Alone, because, COVID has really, I think, put us in a situation where many of us still think, we're alone. Many of us still are kind of living in that bubble, and that is not a good place to be. And so let's explore some ways that all of us can help to enhance mental health in the minority community, but it can enhance mental health in any community that you're a part of. I would first of all tell you to check in. In the minority community, many minorities were raised to be tough You have to be that superwoman, you have to be the Superman, and you have to do this in a very hostile world and a hostile community. But we all need support. Minority populations need to know that they can be provided with a safe space to express their emotions and be able to admit when they're vulnerable. And so, don't forget to check in. It could be a phone call, a short visit, send an edible arrangement or a plant with a message, that just says thinking of you. And this is something that all of us can do for anyone, that we're concerned about or that we know have some mental health concerns. We need to make sure that we check in. We need to look for behavioral or mood changes. It's really important that we don't ignore extreme mood changes or mood swings in our friends or loved ones' behavior, and especially if they've experienced loss of someone close to them or they've experienced loss of a job. And of course, because of COVID, we've experienced many losses. And so it's really important that we listen for expressions of thoughts of self-harm. You may even hear them express concerns of death. You may hear those feelings of hopelessness. They may talk about being a burden to others. If you suspect substance abuse, take action to get help. And these are things that, again, we can look for, those behavioral swings or those mood changes. You also want to look or listen for physical health problems. And you might think, well, how do I do that? Sadness and depression may be expressed through physical ailments. And so sometimes it's not just emotional, but it can also manifest itself physically. And so you may hear complaints of, stomach aches all the time or headaches all the time, when the problem is actual emotional. And so seek medical attention if problems persist. But again, be open that there may be a psychological cause for all of the stomach aches or all of the headaches or whatever those physical ailments the person is complaining about. There could be a psychological cause underneath that is causing those physical issues to manifest themselves. We want to practice empathy. Being empathetic means that people know that we hear them, that we're really listening, we're showing compassion. We are 100% present when we're with them or listening to them. We're really trying to understand how they feel. They feel safe with us. We're exhibiting that warmth that they need at that time. And so practicing empathy is very, very important. When you're working with a depressed friend or a loved one, we want to avoid just glossing over problems by, it's easy for us to say things like, everything works out for a reason or everything happens for a reason. And we want to make sure that we're not saying things like that, because statements like that can worsen a person's sense of isolation. And so what we want to do is practice empathy. We want to listen. We want to acknowledge what they're saying. And then we want to try saying things like, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I hear the pain in your expression. You may want to ask them if there's anyone that you can call for them. If you know of a resource that you can recommend, don't be afraid to ask. And if it's okay for you to leave that information with them, do that. Or better yet, if you can make the contact with them, that would be a great thing to do. And of course, ParentLink is a great contact for that. We want to make sure that we're staying connected. When we talk about a sense of community is one of the strengths of most minority communities. And the pandemic really robbed the minority community of having um, this sense of strength. And so again, seeing friends, you know, if you are in a faith community, joining a community of faith, you know, if you are on social media a lot, you know, log on to social media sites that cater to specific minority communities. And this can help to restore the sense of connectiveness and hope. And, you know, and hope is something that we really need to have. We want to cultivate positive mental health habits, you know, and there are a lot of things that we can do. Yvette tells us about a lot of things through meditation that can help us. And I know during COVID, you know, during the pandemic, a lot of people started to really cultivate a lot of these positive mental health habits. And so we don't want to stop these. You know, journaling is one way to do that. Sometimes it's people who may not be able to express things verbally can get it on paper. And that's a great way, actually, for all of us to express ourselves is through journaling. You know, try to get outside daily. I know, you know, when it's 100 degrees, nobody really wants to go out there, but maybe early in the morning, you can get out there for a couple minutes to enjoy the fresh air, take a little walk around the block, something like that. You know, exercising and eating well can all support mental health. So all of these things will help to support mental health and well-being. Prayer and meditation positively affect our brain health. And faith allows people to hold on to hope that's not theirs until they develop their own. So those positive mental health habits can really help us immensely. And then we want to seek professional help without shame. You know, for minority populations of all ages, seeking out minority therapists and considering group therapy is an option and should be exercised. Often in the minority community, there's a stigma attached to mental health, you know, that, you know, you're weak if you go to seek a mental health professional. You don't tell other people that you are struggling with some mental health issues. And minority populations, like everyone else, should deserve to experience joy and freedom, which means that, you know, they should be able to seek professional help without shame. And then we want to utilize mental health resources. And resources, you know, we know are available, such as the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, or of course, ParentLink. And, you know, we want to utilize these to speak with someone, you know, who can help in the moment, who can help us to come up with a plan, you know, try to get things into perspective so that we're able to move forward. And I know I've said a lot when it comes to mental health, and I am open for questions because although this is Minority Mental Health Month, again, you know, mental health concerns should be a concern for all of us because they're not limited. Mental health does not discriminate. We are all prone to have our own mental health issues, and we want to make sure that we're all healthy, not just physically, but also mentally. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, or comments. I'd be happy to try to address them. It is hard sometimes when you reach out and people don't always, you know, come to assist you. And sometimes it's because, you know, you're fighting your demons and they're fighting theirs too. And sometimes people really don't know how to be there for you. And I would encourage you that, you know, if you are in need of resources, again, call our warm line. If there are resources in the community that can help out, you know, don't be afraid to call them. And, but continue to reach out. I think, you know, the one thing you don't want to do is just say, oh, well, nobody, is assisting me, so I'm just going to stop. Continue to reach out, and, it's not always you. It's sometimes, it's like I said, it's other people. And when we are also having some of those hard experiences, sometimes in the beginning, people are there for us, and then they go on with their lives and they have other issues. And it's not that they forget about us, but sometimes their own issues are consuming them. And so it makes it harder for them to be there for other people. But continue to reach out, continue to ask for that help that you need. And don't be ashamed to, seek some, mental health, providers, assistance as well, because we want you to get healthy and to remain healthy.
Donna, that was a fantastic presentation, and such a timely message for all of us to, really thoughtfully consider. And one of the things that you said that really stuck with me during your presentation was that we're not alone.
Right.
No matter what our situation is, no matter where we're at with, different things going on in our lives, we're not alone. And that sometimes is enough to get us to what we need to do that day or the next day. But so I think that's always something good for us to know. And when we reach out to friends, when we reach out to loved ones, when we reach out to our church community or other organizations that we're a part of, we have that sense of belonging, we have that sense of community, and that's so important. And we're a community for you as well. So don't ever hesitate to add us to your list of supportive networks, because we want to be able to provide that for you as well.
That's right. You always have ParentLink. So, just, always keep in mind, it's okay not to be okay. It really is. We think we always have to be okay. We always have to be fine. We always have to feel like every day is the best day of our lives. And you don't have to feel like that. And it's okay to let people know, that you're not okay. That's the best thing you can do, actually, is to let somebody know that you're not okay, so that you can, move toward being okay. So thank you very much.